Who remembers the era of hypebeast culture and trendy Supreme fad that carried the streetwear scene to great heights? Well, I do. Matter of fact, I contributed to it. Yes, I have to admit that I was a Supreme fiend, but times have definitely changed since then, presumably for the better. But what happened to Supreme? How does this billion-dollar streetwear giant, who's collaborated with luxury brands, motor companies, and influential fashion designers, and created new definitions of fashion, fade out so much over the last few years? It seems like not too long ago, people were walking around with the latest box logo hoodie or new hype Supreme drop, but nowadays, Supreme is rarely talked about. Let's go into why Supreme lost its appeal and how bad business caused them to damage brand reputation. Supreme was founded by James Jebbia in April 1994 in Lower Manhattan, New York. The humble beginnings of Supreme filled a void in the skater fashion scene, setting a solid foundation for what the brand had yet to see in its success. The whole deal with Supreme is that streetwear and skater culture carried it far into the world of fashion. It was designed with skaters in mind, with a unique design for the store layout. By arranging the clothes around the perimeter of the store, a large central space permitted skaters with backpacks to skate into the store. This sense of brand admiration for its customers seemed to spark positive feedback from the tight-knit community at the time. Over the years, Supreme kept increasing popularity both with skaters and streetwear enthusiasts. Supreme had largely started to transform into a brand carried by hype by the late 2000s after the release of the Supreme Nike Blazer collab in 2006, with the shoes retailing for $150 and reselling for $300 to $400. Consumers went crazy for the sneaker because of a picture that surfaced online of Kanye West wearing the shoe. This is dubbed the Kanye effect. To put it simply, Kanye's influence in the music scene correlated to his influence in the streetwear fashion scene. By him wearing these blazers, the newly fed celebrity validation drove the market of these sneakers up, in turn growing the Supreme name. Supreme couldn't get by without controversy though. Going back to the year 2000, Louis Vuitton filed a lawsuit against Supreme after they launched a skateboard deck with a small twist on the iconic LV monogram. A cease and desist was filed for the decks to be immediately removed from shelves and the remaining stock to be destroyed. It was clear Supreme knew what they were doing, but unfortunately for them, they couldn't get by unscathed. This wasn't the only controversy Supreme faced, as many of their designs and graphics nowadays can be considered far out there and offensive, which of course causes mixed opinions of whether the brand should be releasing this apparel or not. But Supreme, staying true to themselves, don't mind this backlash. In fact, they have used it to propel the brand to peak popularity within the streetwear world. Copyright infringement and lawsuits aren't foreign territory for Supreme. Supreme has been accused of copying other brands' work and using them in their own apparel. Most recently in 2019, Supreme was involved in a legal battle with ASAT Outdoors, an outdoor clothing company. ASAT Outdoors alleged that Supreme copied their camouflage patterns. This case was settled out of court, but Supreme still took a hit to their reputation by getting into this situation in the first place. With streetwear style beginning to die out in late 2019, Supreme's influence had started to slow down. People generally weren't as excited for the new drops every week, and sales began to slow down, with many items beginning to sit on shelves, which had never happened before until this point. It seemed like people were finally getting tired of Supreme and seemed to want to experiment with other trends and styles. This is not what Supreme had in mind, but with the fashion culture starting to shift, there was only so much that Supreme could do. It could no longer rely on its past triumphs and needed to come up with something new and exciting. However, Supreme seemed to not be able to adapt quick enough, as consumers were growing tired of the repetitive box logos and increasingly questionable brand reputation, leading into a recession of interest for the brand. The biggest change to Supreme's reputation happened after 2019, because in November 2020, Supreme was bought out for $2.1 billion by the VF Corporation, an American-based footwear and fashion conglomerate. This acquisition completely changed the dynamic for Supreme's popularity because less limited stock and more variety of products began to be produced, effectively saturating the market for Supreme and causing the brand to lose its hype quickly. Supreme began dying out because the supply was matching the demand. This was effectively Supreme's biggest crutch for staying on top of the streetwear scene. Supreme's popularity declined, marking the end of an era for Supreme. While Supreme hasn't totally died off, as some items from their weekly releases still do sell out, the new lack of exclusivity tapered off consumers' interest in the brand. People just aren't as excited for new Supreme drops as they once were, leaving Supreme with the majority of their stock unsold in most weekly releases. Perhaps the brand buyout was the main culprit of Supreme's decline, as it's happened with other clothing brands in the past, but nevertheless, it's safe to say that consumers have moved on. And that's not to say that Supreme won't be back. It is entirely possible that Supreme makes a comeback in the coming years. But for now, go ahead and buy all the Supreme you want while you still can, because you never know, it could one day become hype again.